glad that you decided to come back to another session. And today I want to talk about how I was in a very deep, emotional, and meaningful relationship. And my partner had a tremendous amount of guilt surrounding sex. And I can tell you that this was definitely a problem in the bedroom. And the feeling of guilt was so overwhelming that after my partner's orgasm, there was crying, there was feeling of guilt, there was remorse, there was anxiety, and all these different emotions. And let me tell you, that is a real buzzkill when you just have had what I felt was a great sexual experience and come to find out that my partner's was more of a tragedy. And, that made me feel kind of weird that happened, and my sexual prowess took a dip there too. So you've got to understand that the guilt that was associated with this was from an outside force. They had a religious belief in that premarital sex was not a good idea, and it was ingrained into them to such an extent that they felt guilty about it. And I want to make it clear that sex often brings up emotional and physical and spiritual forces, and you've got to be able to embrace those in order not to feel guilty. And I feel that embracing those emotional and physical and spiritual forces in your body, in your life, are paramount. And the dysfunctionality of what leaders and role models and parents and send this dogma that is diametrically opposed to that is a bunch of BS. And we need to start really listening and weeding out the parts of our lives that are no longer valid. The best one I can give you is the one that you shouldn't talk to strangers. Well, after high school and college, you can talk to strangers. And it's a good idea because that's called sales. That's called forming a relationship. That is called being out there. And that's the way you make it in the world. You've got to be able to communicate and feel good. Well, we've got to understand where those feelings or emotions come from. And we also need to understand what our own basic sexual desires are. So the issue is that guilt comes along and it's given to us. We are not born with this emotion. It is a learned emotion. And it comes from, again, your role models, your parents, your religious leaders, your social leaders. And, guilt can come in many different forms and fashion. You can have guilt from having multiple partners and knowing that you're going to hurt one. You can have guilt for breaking trust with your partner. And an example would be that you have a problem with alcohol and your partner is questioning on it. So you feel guilty that you're not telling him the truth, and that causes performance in the bedroom to just tank. Well, they're going to figure it out pretty quick, I'll tell you that. So you can have guilt from having sex with your partner's brothers or sisters. You can have guilt for not being true to the sexual or spiritual part of sex, and that creates and makes it so that your experience is dimmed. And or having a sexual experience that kind of makes you feel dirty or incomplete, or that will definitely give you guilt. And the whole other part about it is that we get guilt by not expressing our sexual desires, or we have been given that emotion of guilt because we tried to express our sexual desires. Now, understand that guilt is a negative evaluation of ourself. It deals with our self-esteem. If our self-esteem isn't high, then we're going to have problems in other areas. It's not a good thing. And we also feel in distress. We feel like a failure. And when that happens, I can tell you erectile dysfunction is short and coming down on that train pretty quick. And some of the signs of being able to cope with the guilt is anxiety, overwhelmment, And we need to be able to turn that around. So sexual guilt holds us back in intimacy and partnerships and relationships. It diminishes. Understand that guilt is a stronger emotion than pleasure. So how do we deal with that? Well, we need to learn a brand new flavor. We need to start diminishing how much that guilt controls. And one of the ways is that we walk up to that guilt line of sexual pleasure. We don't cross it, we just walk up to it. We do have pleasure. We enjoy the pleasure, but it's no guilt. And that's how I was able to resolve it with this partner that I had that had guilt around having premarital sex. Making sure that the sex and the pleasure always win and guilt never comes around. Well, another way to change your lifestyle and be able to start really feeling is to be true to your word. Whatever words come out of your mouth about your sexual desires, your sexual expressions, they need to be talked about. And they need to be openly talked about. And again, when that feeling of guilt comes along, we need to put it aside because it's not real. It is okay for us to talk about our sexual expression, our sexual reflections, and we need to learn that where did we pick up our sexuality? Where did we learn about sex? Off the internet? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. What about, off the bathroom walls? Where did we learn from, reality is that you probably didn't get it from a reliable source, and there was a lot of mixed messages. And, what we need to do is experiment with our bodies. We need to figure out what gets us excited in the area of having sexual pleasure. And when we make that decision that it is okay for us to be sexually aroused, then that guilt will slowly go away. We also need to understand and want to increase our emotional and physical connection with ourselves, because we can't give anything that we don't know about. It's amazing to me, the example is that people only talk about the things that they know about. They don't talk about anything they don't know about. So if you are not conscious or aware of how your body is stimulated, what gives you pleasure, what makes you happy, what makes you joyful, well, then you can't communicate that to anybody else in order for them to be able to support you in getting joy, happiness, or some kind of pleasure. Now, we are at a point where if you do have guilt around sex, guilt around money, guilt around fame, I can support you and I can help you with different types of therapy. Reiki healing and also cognitive behavioral modification. But there are plenty of other therapists out here, but understand that guilt